In this video, we'll be revealing 6 retirement spending surprises backed by data from over 280,000 households. These are patterns that most retirees overlook, and really how to consider adjusting accordingly. So through analyzing JP Morgan's comprehensive spending data and frankly, working with retirees who discovered their spending patterns were completely different than their expectations, we've identified some specific surprises that I think can potentially derail retirement budgets, and we'll share some strategies with you to prepare for those issues. So that's exactly why we're making this video today, to show you the data-backed spending realities of retirement, how to really plan smarter rather than relying on just outdated assumptions. So let's get right into it. Spending surprise number 1, your spending gradually declines with age. This one, the data really did surprise me with this one. And I think every situation varies, right? But it's super interesting. Folks think that, spending stays flat or increases due to inflation. The data actually says otherwise. Now, I think part of this is go-go, slow-go, no-go years. And turns out the data that JP Morgan did sort of backs that, right? Over time, your spending decreases, not necessarily because of financial stress, but because you just don't want to spend anymore. I think that's really, really interesting. So across households from 250 to 750 in assets, spending declined by about 2% on average, which is generally below the inflation rate. So why does this happen? Well, go-go years, slow-go years, no-go years. People naturally reduce their discretionary spending. Travel slows, shopping slows, entertainment slows. Even with rising healthcare costs, the generation that this data I think is from really tends to tighten their belt rather than spend more. It's going to be, in my view, interesting to see how this holds over time across income levels, especially the folks that are retiring now. As they retire, I don't think that this will work the same way, just FYI. But you want to create a customized spending plan that doesn't just assume that spending is going to be flat. In my view, you really want to figure out what you can spend more proactively than just figuring it out when you get there. That way, you don't really have to worry about this stuff, especially later on in retirement. And speaking of later on in retirement, healthcare, that's where this next one goes. Really pretty big challenge. So let's get to spending surprise number 2. Healthcare costs inflate at about 6% annually. So that's higher than most people expect, even these days. And unlike most retirement expenses, it can really, really compound really quickly and get out of control. Generally, inflation averages between 2 and 3%, depending on the data set that you're looking at. But healthcare costs for retirees, about a 6% increase a year on average. Now, that's including Medicare-related expenses, $6,000-7,000 a year on average. But those are rising. And by your late 70s, your healthcare expenses could be, one of the largest categories in your retirement budget. Maybe even tied with taxes, which is a bigger challenge. What's the challenge here? Healthcare is not really discretionary. You can skip a vacation, unfortunately. You can't really skip a surgery, right? We hope that that's the case. Long-term care, this is another issue. We call this the great white shark of retirement. That can be 3, 4, 5, 6, 700 plus thousand over your lifetime, and most retirees are going to experience it in some form. So how do we deal with it? Well, we've got to plan proactively. We can't just put our head in the sand and pretend like it's not going to be an issue. We've got to deal with it. And if it comes, hope is not a strategy. We need to treat these issues, healthcare, long-term care, separately than other issues and plan to address them specifically. So switching gears on this one, this is super interesting to me. This is spending surprise number 3. Lower income retirees experience a spending surge. Kind of interesting. Pre-retirees that have an income below 150 before they retire see a surge when retirement begins. Where does it show up? Healthcare, food, clothing, housing, kind of your essentials, but a little bit of discretionary, right? So the question is why? I've got a couple of ideas. Here's one idea. Pension, Social Security replace a good chunk of that income, and they can feel more confident to spend because those are guaranteed income sources. Behaviorally, that makes a ton of sense. Now, there's also probably an element of delayed gratification during their career, right? So that you finally retire every day Saturday. They do the stuff that they've put off for a long time. Now, this is super risky, y'all. It really, really is. You don't want to risk doing all the things that you enjoy in life someday, put all that stuff off for someday, because someday may never come. We can't assume that everything is just going to stay the same. Your health's going to be perfect. So, what's interesting about the 150,000 threshold, folks that are above that in terms of their income before they retire, their spending doesn't really change. Super interesting. So now that you understand some of these spending patterns, if you're ready to optimize your retirement strategy, click the link below. We've created a detailed video showing you exactly how to plan for your retirement. But let's go to number 4. This is a super interesting one to me too. About 60% of retirees experience some pretty extreme what they're calling spending volatility. That means that the spending that they have fluctuates. And this kind of makes sense, right? Remember, we told you retirement's not a straight line. But sometimes these swings are 20% or more, especially during the early years of retirement. Super interesting to me. And I think there's kind of 3 different groups of people, right? Upshifters, downshifters, or roller coaster spenders. Only about 18% of retirees maintain stable, predictable budgets. And I think that's really due to not having the ability to spend variably, right? You have a fixed income and you don't really have a choice. What's interesting is this was kind of from before COVID, so it's not a pandemic era anomaly. But that's sort of how retirement works, right? Weddings, family changes, goals, health surprises. All of these things can shape up can shake up your budget, right? So with that volatility, that can add some sequence of returns risk. And we want to encourage you, build a plan that bends without breaking. Flexible withdrawal strategies are really, really helpful for this, in my opinion. What can you spend? What's your spending capacity? That's what the kind of planning that I do drives at. Not just like, here's 4%, you got a 60-40 portfolio, good luck. That's not the way we plan. The way that we plan, assumes that things are not going to be exactly the way you expect in retirement. And we want to proactively figure out what you can spend and how you need to adjust if that happens. So let's go to number 5. Here's another really interesting one. Partially retired households tend to spend more. Now, if you think about working in retirement, maybe that's part-time work. Maybe that's going to lower your spending overall. That tends to not be the case. I think part of it is that households that partially retire actually, they need to spend a little bit more because maybe they tend to carry more credit card debt, save less overall. These are longer-term behavioral challenges, I think. So look, sometimes we've got to read into the data a little bit, and this is not perfect. It's just trying to work it out and think through it, so that you know how to avoid some of these pitfalls, right? So folks that maybe have not saved really well, sometimes have to work a little bit longer in retirement, and there are behaviors that tend to compound into that, right? Carrying credit card debt, not saving well, spending more on lifestyle experiences than they can afford to. We can see how that could snowball, right? And it's fine if that's what you plan to do. It's all about being proactive, in my view, and planning ahead, and then setting goals to achieve that plan and benchmarks to do it. But doing that too much can, and working in retirement, can create kind of a false sense of security, maybe a little of a permission slip to overspend. That can be a challenge. And the truth is, transitioning to retirement, it's really, really hard. And this is just one way that lifestyle creep can happen. And folks can get caught spending a little bit more than maybe they can afford to do. Another interesting one. This is our last one. Interesting, kind of consistent, but on the latter end of retirement here. Spending volatility persists even for folks who are sort of later in their retirement careers, right? 75 to 80. Folks assume that spending kind of settles down at this point. And it doesn't seem to look that way. There's still some volatility in that older age group's spending. And I think what the data here is really trying to drive at is things, again, are not as predictable as we'd like them to be. Only about 34% of these older retirees actually achieve, some stability. And I think that percentage is those that have a fixed income. This is my guess. I don't know for sure, but that makes sense to me. So health changes, family emergencies, market dips, right? The folks that are in that age bracket right now from that generation, in my experience, are more likely to tighten the belt than to splurge. So I think the point is that retirement doesn't really follow a neat, stable curve. It's dynamic. And I think your spending strategy should be dynamic as well. Your retirement income strategy should be dynamic as well. So now that you understand these spending surprises, let's look at how you implement this planning into your situation. How should you think about this? We sort of call this the smart spending framework. And it's really designed to try to account for all of these surprises. And really the goal is to help you to build a retirement strategy that holds up against these sort of known issues, but also some unknown issues as well, and all of this complexity. Well, how do we do it? You need a framework that helps you to figure out what you can spend that's flexible, that's not rigid. And in my view, that means abandoning the 4% rule or the 3% rule, whatever they've called it now, okay? Planning for some of these categories separately, and then continuing to stress test your spending capacity. So how do we do it? We want to take into account what you plan to spend. What are your goals, and what are some big variable expenses that you can predict? Vacations, cars, house, and we need to figure out what can your portfolio support? What does your risk tolerance look like? What's your risk capacity? What does that look like? And how do we model what you can adjust your spending or project it out, and what your baseline should be? That's really, really critical. And that's exactly what we do. When we do this type of retirement planning, we build scenarios that can essentially figure out, what you can expect based on historic returns from portfolios that are similar to yours. We stress test what that looks like over a variety of different historically challenging periods. And we can figure out, we add in your guaranteed income sources. We figure out what's a conservative spending strategy. What can you afford to do? But then the question is, that's more important, when do you adjust? When do you maybe have to tighten the belt a little bit? Or when do you spend more aggressively because your portfolio has grown? And for our clients that implement this, that's what we're encouraging them to do, spend more aggressively, more proactively. But that's because we've done the planning. And so in order to do that, you've got to do the planning first. So now that you understand these 6 retirement spending surprises, these are backed by data from over 280,000 households, and anecdotally, the planning work that I've seen, got some ideas about how to plan for some of these realities a little bit better. We can help you create a realistic budget rather than just relying on, rigid rules or outdated assumptions. And if you're ready to get our help to optimize your retirement spending strategy, I want to encourage you, click the link below. We've created a comprehensive video showing exactly how you can build the retirement you've always wanted. So like, subscribe, follow us, click the link below. I look forward to talking to you soon.